Hey guys, it's Halsey with the Helicopter Podcast, and on this week's episode, I sit down with my good buddy Ian Swett. Ian and I actually met a few years back flying Grand Canyon tours at Maverick Helicopters, and now we work together again at Helicopter, so it's super cool. On this episode, we talk about his desire of getting into helicopters, what drove him to do it, and then talk about his different jobs, flying up in Alaska, flying tours, now air medical. So it's a super fun chat. Ian's a great guy, ton of knowledge. So I hope you enjoy the episode as much as I enjoyed chatting with Ian. And if you like the Helicopter Podcast, please continue to listen. We're going to try to get podcasts out every week. You can like it, you can subscribe to it, so you get notified when a new episode drops. We are available on all major platforms, so check us out wherever you enjoy your podcast. And then if you're going to be at this year's Heli Expo, would love to say hi to you in person. My business, Helicopter, will be exhibiting. We're going to be in booth C4626, Charlie 4626. So we're super excited for Heli Expo this year and super excited about the Helicopter Podcast. So hope you all enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening. Hey, what's up, guys? It's Halsey Scheider with the Helicopter Podcast. I am chatting with my good buddy Ian Swett today. Ian, what's happening?
What's going on? Good to be here.
Yeah, not much. A little cold up here in Oregon. I think you guys got a pretty cold blast there in the Northeast last week too, huh?
Yeah, I was down into the negatives there for a little bit. I missed it though. I was down south in Virginia for it. So
Oh yeah. Were you down for pleasure or business?
I was down there for work, doing my EMS work down the Richmond area of Virginia.
Nice. Well, we'll kind of work our way backwards, I guess, since we're already talking about it. So you're currently flying air medical?
I am. I'm currently a float pilot for MedTrans, flying air medical.
So I know a lot of our listeners are interested in air medical. I certainly know that was a big aspiration of mine, getting into flying as well. Um, what is a float pilot essentially? What is the difference between being a float pilot, a normal line pilot?
So a float pilot basically does the same duties as a line pilot, but I have no assigned base. I cover bases wherever they need me, wherever they have openings across the company. So I'm assigned to a region. I'm with Region 4, which is kind of the central east coast of MedTrans. And the regional manager will have, usually it's a position to fill at a base with a pilot that they need to hire. And I will, be sent to these positions and I'll work the line on their schedule until they find a pilot that can fill that base permanently. So I'm kind of always traveling around.
Now, do you prefer that, or would you maybe just prefer to have a home base?
Having a home base is really nice in some ways. I think it kind of works out. There's positives and negatives to both. I do the helicopter stuff with you as well, so it gives me a lot of time while I'm on the road. A lot of free time to make phone calls and do sales for helicopter as well. When I'm home, it's nice to be back with the family every night. Now I'm away for them for a week at a time, which can be rough sometimes. It was definitely
Sure.
roughest when I first started doing this, and it's become easier the more and more I do it. You get used to it, and you kind of get in a groove with things, and you get your pattern down. When I'm away, it allows me to concentrate on work and concentrate on myself. Like I go to the gym and I work out. When I'm home, I'm a dad, and I'm being jumped on by my kids and doing family things. So I kind of get a balance of both. So I think it would be nice to have a base right near my house, but unfortunately, MedTrans doesn't. The closest MedTrans base to me is about a 2-hour commute in Connecticut. I live in the Rhode Island area, Providence, and so yeah, I think right now what works best for me is the float pilot position and traveling around.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I guess, of course, benefits to everything. I think that's the hard part about air medical is that it's hard to find a base uh, located in a place that you actually want to live as well. Obviously, the purpose of air medical is to provide access to places that may not have the best medical care, and so usually they're not located in super desirable areas. I always kind of got a kick out of it going to flight school. I had some friends that were like from some pretty podunk places, places that most people don't want to live. But man, they were stoked because there's always air medical openings in
It's
their
really easy to find a
hometown.
job, yeah, where they want to be.
Yeah, so they're like moving back home. they're back with their family, and it's like, a 5 minute commute. So it certainly definitely benefits those. So if you're listening to the podcast, you live in a podunk town, and there's an air medical base, there's a good chance that you might be one of the only guys or gals that actually want to work there, which could be a great benefit. Um, that was definitely one of the hard parts for me working air medical was the commute. The closest I ever got to my house was about an hour and 10 minute drive. And, you do that 7 days straight to and from, that puts a lot of miles on the car, um, decreases kind of your restful time. You get off work, go straight to bed, and then got to get up extra early just to get back there. So it certainly adds the challenges, but it's just kind of part of doing the air medical thing. I do want to talk more about air medical. I know that you're in a 135, flying a twin, and you've had some pretty cool experience, but I kind of want to backtrack a little bit and just learn a little bit more about your background. What got you into helicopters? Where did you do your flight training? And then kind of how your career progressed from there. So I know that you were a Marine, so that's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
I was. I grew up, as like really looking up to airplane guys. I had some relatives that were, pilots in the military back in World War II. My mom was a private airplane pilot, and she had gotten that while I was growing up. And I went up in an airplane a couple times with her, and I always wanted to fly airplanes. And I ended up joining the Marine Corps right out of high school, and I kind of just got sent to be a mechanic on CH-53s, big helicopters, the Sikorskis, and the first time I flew on one of those, it kind of changed my world. It was like this different feeling of just picking up off the ground and hovering for the first time, and so that kind of like I was instantly addicted to helicopters, and I wanted to get put on flight orders in the Marine Corps, so I became part of the crew that would fly around in the back, shoot the guns and load the cargo, and I got sick of just riding in the back, so on weekends, while I was in the Marine Corps, I started doing flight training. I went for a little intro ride, drove about an hour north of my base. I was based in San Diego. I drove up to Hellestream in Orange County, and I went for a flight with them and did a little intro flight, and I loved it. And I was like, how do I keep doing this? So they told me to
Yeah.
get my student certificate. I went and got my medical, and yeah, I just kept taking lessons, and I actually got my private rating while I was still in the Marine Corps. You know, um, the big kind of deciding factor of getting out of the Marine Corps was that I got accepted to Embry-Riddle, the Aeronautical University in Prescott, Arizona, with the helicopters on the campus. And it was Universal Helicopters that had the contract at the time. So that was my decision to get out of the Marine Corps, go to college, get my degree, and yeah, do all my flight training. And that's Universal is where I finished up like my instrument commercial CFI and CFII, and I was a flight instructor there for a while.
Oh, that's really cool. I can imagine, like, you're riding in the back of a 53, that gives you a certain expectation of what a helicopter is and isn't. And then you go up to Helistream and do a demo. Was it R-22?
It was a 22, yeah.
I mean, man, talk about like, polar opposites.
Yeah, it felt surreal, like these two little seats. Like I was like, this. It didn't even seem like it was gonna work. It didn't seem practical at first. I'm used to
Sure.
being in a helicopter that's 100 feet long. Yeah,
Yeah, I wonder, yeah, how many R-22s can you put into a 53?
yeah, probably a good
Probably
handful.
probably a few of them at least. Yeah, I mean that's the wild thing. I had some students that were in the military on the flight side. So they came from flying, um, Black Hawk or 53 or whatever other larger, more equipped helicopter. And then you sit them in the R-22, and it's like a whole new world for them. It might as well be a completely different machine.
Yeah, I
You know,
remember in the military, the smallest in the Marine Corps, the smallest aircraft we have, we call them the Skids, the Hueys and the Cobra squadrons. Those are like the little helicopters. And you put one of those next to a lot of what we fly, the light turbines in the civilian world, they're big.
Yeah, they're bigger helicopters. I mean, that's certainly one of the advantages of going the military route. You get to fly some incredible, technology and airframes, whether you're on the helicopter side or even the airplane side. I think the airplane side would be pretty cool in the military. Like, who doesn't want to,
Yeah,
live
flying F-18.
their Tom Cruise life and go and fly fighter jets. So you went to Embry-Riddle. Um, Obviously familiar with Embry-Riddle, large aeronautical university for our listeners out there. If you're not familiar, I know that they have an online program, and then they also have two two campuses, one in Daytona Beach, Florida, and you actually went on campus in Prescott, Arizona.
Yeah, I went on campus in Prescott, Arizona, and I actually ended up finishing my degree through the online courses because I got so busy once I got my flight ratings as a flight instructor. It kind of took over my world. So yeah, but I attended the campus there in Prescott for about 2 years while I did my flight training and finished all that up.
When someone says I have a degree in aeronautical science, what does that mean? And what was a lot of your, I did actually a year of college. That's about as far as I could take it. And I went to
Yeah,
Embry-Riddle actually in Florida. And so I kind of got the gist, but a lot of that first year I was having to do, math and writing and just like the core curriculum before I could really get into the kind of the more aeronautical portion of it. What was the emphasis of that degree? What was a lot of the classes and things that you guys were
a lot of
studying?
the specialty classes, they were all like everything was kind of based around aviation. So even like the like calculus classes, they would be all, you would all kind of base them to scenarios in aviation, in basic aviation engineering type things. We did some study on aviation law. You would study basics of the regulations and that sort of thing, which you got much more in depth in the actual flight school than you would in the college courses. um, Helicopter flight planning, that kind of basic type stuff. And then yeah, you get into like the kind of just like an overall understanding of the aviation industry and how it works. There would be a few aviation business classes that you would take as well. The accounting classes and everything were all based off of aviation companies. Examples were all aviation based companies. But nothing, I'm not like, I wasn't an engineer that really gets in depth into that kind of stuff. It was a very like mild degree, I would say. It's just kind of like an overall encompassing thing of aviation.
Sure. Yeah, I remember my buddies that were doing the aeronautical engineering at Embry-Riddle did not have much of a life
Yeah, yeah,
compared to
much more
me.
difficult than what I did.
Yeah, it was easy to do a little more than I was doing too. I was having a little more fun my freshman year of college. Not I was not studying hard enough. I can tell you, put it to
Studying
you that
different
way.
subjects.
I was different, yeah, non-aeronautical based subjects, including drinking and some other things. So, good times. That's what you do when you're young and dumb.
Yeah, you can learn
What
more during that than a lot of the college courses.
Yeah, I've always kind of said that the school of hard knocks. I've been fortunate, to obviously go through flight training and flight school, be a part of the flight school, be a part of the business side of the flight school, and actually, been now fortunate enough to have my own, helicopter sales business, as you're aware of, for the last 5 years. And part of me does kind of sometimes wish or wonder, man, if I went to business school, would some of this stuff seem or feel easier? And I'm not sure. I think that there's a lot of necessity and argument that college is probably a great thing for many reasons. But I've kind of enjoyed the school of hard knocks, as I like to say. Kind
Yeah.
of learning by mistake. Maybe I'll make less mistakes if I had a little more formal education. But when you were doing your college courses concurrently, you're also doing the flight training, and that's kind of all included within your aviation degree.
Yeah, it's the helicopter flight were actually courses that counted as credits towards the aviation degree. So you would have like a helicopter private flight was like a lab. It was considered a lab, and then you also had the ground course that went with it for each one. So like I had already done private, so those actually counted as credits. They were transferable, my private rating. And then, when I did instrument, the instrument flight was the lab, the instrument ground was its own course. And you actually had to attend it at the school too. So you kind of got double ground sometimes. It was a little funny. But because they contracted their helicopters out, the airplanes are all Embry-Riddle instructors. But I was doing my flight training with Universal Helicopters, who was contracted with Embry-Riddle. So I would go to Universal and I'd get ground lessons, and then I'd go fly. And then in the evening, I'd go to another helicopter, instrument ground course that
Wow,
you'd have to attend to get the credits for.
sounds busy.
It was
Sounds
very busy.
a
Yeah.
little bit more than maybe just typical school. Now, how long did it take you to go from zero to hero, private to flight instructor?
Overall, it was just under 2 years to do everything. There was kind of a gap because I did my private rating in the military. I got the private rating and then I got accepted to Embry-Riddle, and I think I finished my private rating sometime in the spring, and the next semester didn't start until that next fall. So I didn't begin my instrument training until the fall of that year. So I kind of had a gap from spring to fall over the summer where I was waiting for the funding through Embry-Riddle to begin my next instrument rating. So there was a little bit of a gap there, but for the most part, it was about a year and a half to 2 years to do everything.
And how long ago is this?
This was, I have to look at my logbook. I think I started training in 2000. It was 2010. And my first intro flight might have even been just the very end of 2009, and I got my private rating in 2010.
Well, I know that you're a little bit OG because you said earlier, you had to go and get your student pilot certificate, which was your medical. I don't know if you're aware, but now you actually get like an actual hard card student pilot certificate,
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I have heard that. Yeah, no, it was just my medical certificate was what it was. Yeah,
which
I
I have
didn't.
some gripes about because it's like, to me, when you get your private, that's like the coolest thing, like waiting in the mail to get your hard card certificate. You get the Wright brothers on there. And now it's like you could just be a student pilot and get that. Doesn't sit well.
Yeah.
It's a participation pilot certificate, if you ask me. But I
Yeah.
guess uh, I guess it's all right. But
Yeah, it makes it
what?
less special when you actually get that official private one, like you've already
Yeah, I
had the
mean,
card.
that was just to me. I just remember, for me personally, that was like Christmas morning. Just waiting in the mail, intercepting the mail. Kind of reminded me of high school when I was trying to intercept my progress reports.
Yeah. Yeah.
So obviously it's been 12, 13 years since your training. A lot of our listeners are actually in their training right now or getting into their training. Do you remember portions of your training that you found to be difficult, both on the ground or the flight side?
I think the ground, one of the hardest things I think that just people don't realize is the amount of ground and studying that goes into becoming a pilot. I think like you're just going to go fly the aircraft around. You got to study a little bit, right? But you just got to be a good pilot. You got to learn to fly. And I don't know the actual number, but it felt like for every hour of flight I did, there was 5 to 10 hours of ground studying. And so that was tough just to get used to the sheer volume. And then I know I struggled with holds a little bit doing the learning holds when I got into my instrument rating, just kind of like trying to picture out what I was supposed to be doing and intercepting the hold and what kind of entry into the hold and all that was tough. And then really, once I got into CFI, it was like building the lesson plans, and that was the busiest time probably still of my life where I was just, all day at the flight school trying to fly and do my CFI flights, and then I'd go home and spend hours and hours into the night just building lesson plans, and then wake up early and do it all over again.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a lot of ground. I always tell people that are getting into it. The flying part is certainly the fun part, but probably the more important part is the ground. If anything can snag you up, it's the ground. Getting the
Yeah.
writtens done, and it's the kind of the silly part too. Like the written, to me, it's like you're taking the written test. There's not, I get why they do it, obviously, but it's just some of the questions are kind of, in my opinion, non-practical.
Yeah, and
It's
almost the
like,
written test, it's like it's more of a formality, but where you really get grilled is by the DPE when they do your check ride. That ground is like the real ground, I feel like the real knowledge, and the written tests are kind of those, those multiple choices that are a little bit almost silly to answer, it feels like.
yeah, no, I agree. I think me personally, I hate taking tests, like written tests. So I
Yeah.
feel like the written test always gave me more anxiety. Whereas we were lucky, I went to Hillsborough and we had some really cool DPEs. I did most of my rides were with a guy named Mark Holstat, who was Vietnam guy, then Life Flight Network for like 30 years. And he was just one of those guys that you want to bear hug. He's just like the nicest, wasn't trying to fool you, wasn't, very straightforward, made it a comfortable atmosphere. So like the in-person check ride, the practical side of it was always, to me, kind of less stressful because I was comfortable with Mark, and then obviously I got to do check rides with our boy Sean Moretz. That's how
Yeah.
Sean and I
Yeah.
connected. So he did my instrument double I. So he put me through the ringer a little bit on the instrument stuff. But beyond that, I always I did well in the writtens, but man, I was get some super test taking anxiety with that.
Stressful. Yeah. I think I used it was the ASA software, just
Yep,
the discs. Yeah, and just went through it until I had everything memorized.
the discs. What's a CD-ROM? You're gonna have to explain to your kids someday.
Yeah.
They actually had to put a disc in a
Yeah.
computer.
Where do you put it into your iPad?
Yeah, I don't know. Where does it fit? I'm looking right now. I don't see anything. So what about maneuver wise on the flying side? So for me personally, I think I've talked about it on the podcast. I had difficulty with auto rotations. I feel like the second that I learned about low RPM blade stall, my auto rotations went to complete crap because I was
Yeah.
so fixated on looking at my tack that my eyes wouldn't be outside. So I'd enter the auto and, not looking outside, that nose dips. And, once you
Really
lose
didn't
the
want to get that low
nose,
rotor.
especially with the low inertia, I mean, that now you're just chasing RPM the whole time. So for me personally, auto rotations were tough. What was there a maneuver or something that you found difficult?
I think at first when I was doing the private rating, the thing that was worse for me was settling with power, and I think it was it was in my head the same. I had actually recently had an incident. I was riding in the back. We were on a long flight from Northern California to Southern California IFR, and the pilots actually got spatial disorientation and lost all their airspeed at about 12,000 feet, and we got settling with power over the mountains in the clouds IFR. And yeah, we lost in about 45 seconds. I think we lost almost 6,000 feet of elevation before miraculously recovering in the clouds. And yeah, so going into understanding what settling with power was more in depth as we had the ground lessons on it and realizing that was what had just happened to me. And then having to actually go back and purposefully do it was kind of weird and scary to me.
Yeah, I mean that's terrifying. I mean, you're lucky to be alive. I had no idea that that
Yeah.
happened. Like that's pretty much the worst case scenario. Like how
Yeah,
do you
it
even
was
recover from that? Like I don't even
it was
understand.
what it yeah we have these two pilots in the Marine Corps, right? There's two in the helicopters, and they call it a hack, which is essentially the PIC or pilot in command, and then second in command. And the hack was a newer hack. They'd just been signed off, so they were new at being in charge of the aircraft. And the PIC or the SIC was a very, very new pilot, had just come to our squadron, and she was on the controls, the hack, the PIC, and she had slowed down, and she thought that her airspeed gauge was not reading correctly. And you could hear her getting worked up and saying that we've lost our airspeed, the gauge isn't working. And the second in command, the very new guy, was actually very calm, and he's like, "No, ma'am, I think we just need a little bit of airspeed. We just need to push forward on the stick and get a little airspeed." And I peek up there, and the thing is just pegged out. The VSI's pegged out. The altimeter's winding like a clock, just like speeding. I'm looking out the window into the clouds, and we were coming back from a detachment in Northern California, and there was a very senior pilot in the back with a bunch of passengers just riding, and he sensed it. This whole thing happened in about 45 seconds, and he sensed it, and he walks up, jumps onto the jump seat, glances at the gauges, and he reaches forward with both his hands and puts them on both cyclic sticks and just pushes them forward and just starts getting airspeed. And that was kind of our saving grace. And at this point, when he did this, when we finally got our airspeed back and recover, we'd fallen from around 12,000 feet down to about 6,000 feet. And we were over the mountains just north of LA where there are peaks up to 885. So we were well below and we're still in the clouds.
Oh, that's
Yeah, terrible.
terrifying. Like
Yeah.
that's like a nightmare.
Yeah, it
Like, do
was.
you wake up still with night sweats? Like
No,
for
I
me,
don't still think about it like that. It didn't fully hit me until probably like 8 hours after that. I was driving home and I felt that it was, it really like the weight of what had happened hit me. But I still remember, I just remember staring out my window into the white soup and just waiting for a mountainside to come. Like I was sure it was coming,
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just absolutely horrifying. Speaking of something with power, in any of your jobs, air medical tours, whatnot, have you done any of the new technique? What is it, the
The
Richard?
Bouchard, yeah. I have done. I actually did it at Maverick, when which we haven't mentioned yet, but flying tours at Maverick, which is where you and I met, Halsey, in the Grand Canyon,
I
and
remember, yeah, I remember.
and yeah, so I did it with Dwayne at Maverick. We did a Vachard maneuver recovery, and it is very quick. But one thing that we noticed is it's very, very easy to over torque the helicopter because you're pushing that power
The
pedal
power
and
pedal.
you're keeping your power pulled in. Yeah, and you have to really kind of crank on the power pedal. So yeah, you have to watch. You can really easily over torque the thing doing that recovery.
Yeah, now that you say that, I'm trying to think. I don't know if I did the Vachard with Dwayne or not. We did so much. I loved flying with Dwayne. Shout out to Dwayne Martin, Maverick Helicopters,
Yeah,
director of training out there. We did a lot of stuff with Dwayne. I mean, he knew how to fly that machine. I don't think we did the Vachard, but I know that we did essentially kind of the anticipator horn going off with like too much power pedal,
hmm
like in a hover and things like that. So it makes sense, if you're applying that pedal, maintaining power, then yeah, you have to be careful. I did the Vachard technique just in the simulator at Air Evac. They did it. Um, Air Evac, I would say, was fairly conservative in their approach to in aircraft maneuver training, with auto rotations, selling with power. You didn't really get too deep into things, and so they would supplement it with kind of their simulator. So I don't have like a full in-aircraft experience, but I should talk to that guy. Maybe get him on the podcast. Learn a little bit more about
yeah.
it. He's probably too technical for me.
Yeah, yeah. None of us would understand the actual explanation.
Yeah. No. Actually, I'm not kidding. I probably wouldn't understand, but I would shake my head and nod and just pretend. Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting. You have an experience. Obviously, I could see selling. I never loved selling with power. I always thought that it was. This is, we're recording live, kind of. Obviously, it's not live, but if you could see the video, Ian's ear pod just fell out of his ear. So if you heard that little, that was
Yeah,
thanks to
we're
Ian.
good. Technical
Ian, we're
difficulties.
trying to run a professional show here, pal. If you could just be a little bit better, that'd be great.
I've always had this problem actually. I have very small ears, and I've always had a problem with headphones and ear pods fitting and staying in my
Hmm.
ears.
Yeah, I got the Apple ones, and yeah, they don't work well for my ears. They like if I'm sitting here on a podcast, sure, they're fine. But like if I'm walking or running, yeah, there's no chance they're gone.
Yeah.
So our ear canals just don't work, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I never liked cellular power. To me, it always kind of felt just uncomfortable. I remember it was the first time I fully felt it was at the Robinson Safety Course. If you haven't gone to the Robinson Safety Course and you're listening, it's a pretty cool course. A lot of the ground is a lot of what you've learned in your private already, but getting out there and actually flying with one of the Robinson instructors is pretty fun. And I remember being, a newly minted private pilot flying with one of those guys. I think he ended up being a Maverick pilot too, but he was gone before I was there. But he was doing crazy stuff in the 22. Like I thought he was like a god of flying. And I remember we got it. We were over Compton, pulls us up into sailing with power, gets into it, raises a bunch of power, and we're just falling. It was like this stomach's in my throat type of situation. It's just kind of an unsettling feeling.
Yeah, it does not feel good. They actually, I think they had a couple incidents with it, and in my time as which we haven't talked about yet either, but I was a 135 check airman in EMS, and it used to be that you had to on the check rides you had to actually demonstrate settling with power and the recovery of it, and it's become a verbal thing. You don't have to actually do the maneuver on a 135 check ride. It can just be purely verbal now.
It's interesting. I mean, I get both sides. I think obviously muscle memory and practical training, especially at a safe altitude, is probably advisable. Um, but my other stance on it is sailing with power is one of those things that you should hopefully never get yourself into. So, like
Yeah,
having just the total and complete understanding of every situation and scenario that you could put yourself into sailing with power, you just don't put yourself in that position. But
yeah.
things happen. Winds can shift. Things can change. You could get distracted. I was flying a couple of years ago. I was doing backup flying for the news, and I was supposed to be a backup, and then the main guy had some heart issues, so I got thrusted into full time, and that's a different story. But doing this news for I don't know 8 months, and it was the morning, and the winds were howling on the surface, and they were coming, call it from the north. I don't remember which way they were coming, but the winds felt consistent. Get up to altitude, and we're circling around an accident, and there was a wind shift at altitude that I didn't really. It was dark out. I wasn't, I guess, really fully aware. I just get in my orbit. You kind of get used to doing the same thing every day. You can put yourself into a bit of a trap. And before I knew it, I start to settle. And it's like, whoa. And I remember my camera guy in the back was like, whoa, everything all right? I'm like, yeah, we're good. You're,
Yeah.
you're fine. So I mean, it's one of those things I could preach all day that you shouldn't put yourself in that position, but there are times where circumstances could put you or lead you into that spot.
Yeah.
I consider myself to be a fairly conservative, aware pilot, and obviously I lost that focus there and put myself in that position. So I see both sides. I think if you're at a safe altitude practicing, it's probably a good idea. Um, so you do your CFI thing. From CFI, did you go straight? No, you went to Temsco. So you went
I
up to
went to
Alaska.
Temsco, yeah. Yep, I
Man,
did a season up in Alaska.
you've been around. You've been
I
around.
have, yeah.
Classic
Yeah.
helicopter pilot. Been
Yeah, thrown
there, been
all over
here.
the place.
So for our listeners who may not be familiar with Temsco, what is Temsco and what do they operate? What do they do? What did you do?
So Temsco is an operator that's founded up in Alaska. They do primarily tours out of two bases, out of their Juneau base and out of Skagway, which are both in southeast Alaska. And then they also have some like utility contracts. They do Forest Service stuff and stuff with mining companies and that sort of thing. And kind of the way it works with Temsco is you go up and it's only a seasonal thing. They only have a few employees and pilots that are full time that stay up there year round. The place kind of shuts down for the winter time. And so you go up, and the first thing you do when you get hired on is you become a tour pilot there, and you fly tours out to the glaciers in southeast Alaska. They had really two tours. One was you get flown out to a glacier and you land on the ice, and we drop the people off, and they go around with our glacier guides, while we go back and pick up the next group. And the other one was a dog sledding tour. You land higher up on the glacier where there's still some snow left, and you drop them off, and they go on a little dog sled, and then you bring them back down. And so you do that. It's a seasonal thing. I did it for one summer. They operate for their tour aircraft. They're all A stars. I actually did my training in an old BA and was flying the tours in a A-star B2. They have B3s and B3Es now. They still have the B2s that I was flying when I was there in Skagway, and they also have they have quite the fleet of helicopters. They're a really large operator up there. They have some MD-500s. They have a couple Bells. I think they were 205s. I'm not sure. I never got into those, but bigger Bells. Um, yeah, for a lot of utility work, they go all the way up into the interior, and they've gotten their hands into a little bit of like heli skiing and stuff too. I know, but I think some of the other operators do a much larger portion of that stuff.
I mean, that's cool. That's a great first gig. Um, I never flew Alaska. I've never even been to Alaska. I really want to go. Um, we should try to like get a sail from Alaska, so I have to go.
I know. I've been talking with Temsco. Shout out to Eric Eichner. Maybe we'll be able to do some business with him one day here. But
Eric,
yeah,
let us sell your helicopters, pal. We can do it. Um,
he's looking for more now. Business is good.
oh, good. Well, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah.
It's good. I know that COVID was probably very hard on them and a lot of tour companies. Sundance
Yeah.
closed down in Vegas. I know it was a hard time. So it warms my heart to hear that these operators, tour operators specifically, are rocking and rolling again. I think tourism's kind of on fire now.
Yeah.
Even with inflation and whatnot, people are spending money on doing experiences and tours.
Well,
When
I actually just talked to him recently too, and a big thing is they're doing kind of like exploration in minerals. They're looking for minerals. They'll have helicopters that are flying around up in Alaska looking for minerals to mine. The whole oil and gas and the mineral industry up there is really big.
I've been watching Gold Rush recently, and every once in a while they'll have a. Usually, it seems like they have Coastal, the other one of the other operators up there, flying them
Yeah.
around and looking for gold. you know,
Yeah.
making it seem pretty dramatic, even though it's probably not all that dramatic.
Yeah.
Um, but for for a first job, not only is it a great, you probably got a fair amount of turbine time in your first season there, but what I've to understand from talking to other buddies is that Alaska is no joke. You're doing the same thing every day, practically doing these tours, one of two options, as you were talking about. But Mother Nature up there is still pretty intense, even in the summertime, right?
Oh yeah, it's very intense, and it's probably the coolest flying I will still ever do. It's the coolest flying I've ever done so far in those mountains, and probably the coolest flying I will ever do. But it changed so rapidly. There were times where you would land the helicopter on a glacier. You'd be on this pretty steep slope. You'd nose the thing in, and you'd wait for them to come load the people up. And we'd be landing down farther on the glacier because the camp was up in the clouds, and we couldn't get to it. And you would see the clouds rolling down the glacier. And by the time that they loaded the people into my helicopter, you're already pretty much completely enshrouded in the clouds. Like it could change that fast.
Wow.
Yeah, you're in the clouds. And you could get trapped up there sometimes. And there was times where we'd have to spend some hours on the glacier, because you'd go back down. You'd be up at 5 or 6 thousand feet, and you go back down, and the little fjords, the ocean was blocked off. It's all of a sudden there's a layer of clouds over the ocean, and you can see the mountains coming up through, but you can't see where you need to go. You're kind of blocked like a gate between the town down below and the
Just
glacier.
get to spend the night on a glacier. Did you ever have to spend the night or just a couple hours?
Never unintentionally. I actually had this really cool trip that I did while I was out there. So we had these things called deadheads. At the beginning, we had to drop the glacier guides off out on the glacier. So at the beginning of every day, a helicopter went out and dropped the glacier guides off and came back empty. And then for the rest of the day, it would be flying people back and forth, whether they would be bringing somebody out or bringing people back all day long. And then at the end of the day, a helicopter would go out empty and it would pick the glacier guides up and it would come back. So what I did, my mom actually came and visited for a week while I was up there flying, and she's a very, very outdoorsy person who loves to explore. So I got us on the empty helicopter out at the end of the day. We got dropped off and spent, it didn't get dark until almost midnight in
Huh.
Alaska in the summer. So spent the night exploring glaciers, ice caves, and that sort of thing, hiking and climbing, and got a few hours of sleep. And then the empty helicopter came out in the morning and picked us up and brought us back.
Man, that's super cool.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
That would be. It's one of those cool experiences. That's one of the things I love about helicopters most is love them or hate them. Obviously, we love them, but they can put you in places that are so serene. You know.
Yeah. I
Um,
remember it was so demotivating in Alaska to hike. We had this little hike that went right up behind the town, and it gained almost 4,000 feet in elevation. But it was only over a period of, a mile or so. It was very, very quick and steep elevation gain. It was right up the mountain, right behind the town that we lived in, and it would take a half a day to hike up that thing. And there's a little cabin in the lake, and it was beautiful up there. But we would sometimes drop people. They'd pay for a helicopter to bring them up to the cabin, and it would be less than a minute flight. It was about a 45-second flight to bring the people up to that cabin. And it
yep.
makes you, yeah, it's very demotivated to go hike for half a day with what you just did in 45 seconds.
So you finish up at Temsco. You do the season there. Um, I'm sure you had a lot of fun up there. I can only imagine. A bunch of young tour pilots. Spending a
Yeah,
summer in Alaska.
all living together. It's like a reality TV show. We
Oh
lived
God,
above the hangar. There were living quarters above the hangar and the helicopters below us. And yeah, we all lived together.
you were there with Trevor at the same time, right?
I was with Trevor.
That's
Yeah,
trouble.
we, we kind of went everywhere together. And we like to have fun.
Trevor and Ian, dangerous combination. Now you're both married and kids. Now you're both
Yeah,
kind
we
of
have we have both slowed way
you're
down.
kind of boring now.
But
So you get
nicer. You say I'm nicer.
you're a softer, nicer, a little more dad bodier version of the former Ian that I knew. So you and I met at Maverick. We were flying H-130s, T2s, B4s, doing the Grand Canyon tours. Uh, I know for me personally, it was a cool gig, a great way to build time. By far, Maverick in my opinion, the company to work for. If you're flying, tours in the Grand Canyon, nice machines, good maintenance, they pay pretty well. For me personally, I could not. I made it just barely 2 years, mainly because I was just having trouble maintaining my composure with the guests. Doing the same tour
Yeah.
over and over, answering kind of the same silly questions. What was your experience there?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I would feel burnout with doing the same thing over and over. It was a little better than what you would do at Temsco in that sense because the tours were longer at Maverick, right? You would do if you were just a day pilot, really the max you'd end up doing is three long Grand Canyon flights, three-hour flights was kind of the max that you could fit into a day. And at Temsco, they were very, very quick flights. It was about a 20-minute flight each. So you would do, you know, I don't know, 20, 30 plus in a day. It was a lot. And so, I definitely though still felt it. I would start to get burned out. I ended up on the night shift at Maverick, which you did also, which was kind of the best schedule you could have. You would do one flight out to the Grand Canyon in the evening when it wasn't usually as hot and the sun was going down,
Hmm.
and you wouldn't have to spend the whole day out there. And we'd come back and we'd just do the shorter strip tours, do a few of those. Um, the thing that I ended up doing that was kind of getting me through is we had those little tour audio programs on the helicopters that were made really for the purpose of playing when we had people that didn't speak English. But I did a little experiment over a month and I kept track of my tips and I played nothing but that tour audio program for a month and people were all still happy. They all still my tips didn't change. The average was exactly the same. So from then on out, I played that tour audio program, and it made it a lot easier for me to deal. I would still talk to the people when we were out in the canyon, and be a good Maverick pilot, but it was a lot easier for me to kind of get through the days when I didn't have to say the same thing over and over and over again. And that
Yeah,
tour audio was doing it for me.
yeah. Year one, I only used the tour audio. If we had a non-English speaker, and obviously, if you're using it for one passenger, you have to use it for all. You can't have a mix. So I would
Yeah,
always get pretty excited. But yeah, near the end, probably the last 6 months, that tour audio was on a lot.
yeah,
I was plugging my music and let them do the tour. But the tour audio, I don't know why that word is so hard for me. Tour audio was difficult though too because it was glitchy. Like,
yeah. It was, or it'd miss if you didn't hit the window that you were supposed to fly through on the GPS. It would miss. You could hit the button if you noticed and make it play, but sometimes it would get off, and It would be talking about something that's not supposed to happen on the way
yes,
back, and you're still on the way out.
I know. So that was always like, you're flying a helicopter. It's usually fairly congested. It is all the tour audio is always starts malfunctioning early. So like you're right off departure, you're about to hit the dam, which is like the bottleneck of the tour route with aircraft coming
Yeah.
from Boulder and Henderson and Vegas. You're fumbling around trying to fix that. It's always kind of a nightmare.
I actually had kind of a funny story. When I was new, we had to make our playlists, right? If you weren't using the tour audio, you had your own playlist that you would play from like an iPhone or an iPod, and you play music and you'd give a tour verbally. And it was one of my first couple weeks there, and we get out to the canyon and we land, and I go to take my old iPod out. It was like a iPod Mini or something like that, and I go to turn it off, and I realized that it's on Highway to the Danger Zone on repeat. So they'd been listening to it for 45 minutes on the flight out there, probably thinking I'm just like, legitimately think that I'm Tom Cruise.
I mean, come
I
on,
don't know how that
you
happened, but
worked for Maverick.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember the whole thing was like kind of stressful because you go through the training. Some point during training, they gave me like a brochure of Grand Canyon facts, and maybe
Yeah.
a link to like a YouTube video or something. So I'm like, oh
I
crap,
think there were a couple binders up in the like pilot break room that you could read
yeah.
that were
And
there.
I would do some ride-alongs, which helped. But then I
Yep.
remember I passed my check ride, and they're like, "All right, cool, you're on the 7 a.m. tomorrow. Make sure you have your iPod." And I'm like, "iPod? What are you talking about, iPod?" So I remember like
Yeah.
it's 6 o'clock in the evening. I'm dead tired for my check ride. I'm nervous for my first tour the next day. I don't know about you. I mean, I guess you had done Tempsco, so you were kind of used to it. But that was like my first big boy job, and so like
Yeah.
I was feeling a lot of nerves. And at Maverick they follow you. the chief pilot or the assistant chief.
Wow, all the bosses,
That
you fly between them.
yeah, you have to fly, with them right on your tail, for those first, 5 or 10 tours, which is intimidating. So I'm all stressed out. I remember I went to a pawn shop. I didn't really have much money either. And, go to a pawn shop. I get this old $60 iPod, and then I'm like, I don't even know how to put music on an iPod. Like, so I had to go home, figure all that out. So
Download iTunes.
I think Hillary ended up helping me. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, Maverick was cool, good experience. You and I have talked about it before. The camaraderie, the group of pilots was fun. It's a unique job that you don't get that in air medical. You get to your air
Yeah,
medical
not at all.
base, you have your crew, which they're sometimes cool, sometimes maybe not so cool. They're certainly not pilots. Um, so it's the being at Maverick, I was nervous about all the essentially all the testosterone there. What that would be like, a bunch of egotistical pilots, but it really ended up being a pretty cool thing. I think everyone
Yeah.
respected each other. We had a lot of fun. Doing nights was a lot of fun because we'd have some time between our strip tours. We'd be playing games in the pilot
Yeah.
lounge.
Yeah.
We should post that video on our social media. I think you're in a.
The basketball trick
I
shot.
think you're in a
I was doing a
wheelchair.
wheelie on a wheel. Yeah, I was wheeling a wheelchair and made a behind the back basketball shot while wheeling the
Yeah,
wheelchair.
it's
That was,
epic.
yeah.
We should post that.
Yeah.
We should maybe in the.
I'll send it to
Yeah, send me that. Maybe I can try to link it in this podcast or something, so you can see what kind of hooligans we are.
you.
Mainly Ian. I was always a respectful, uh, nice boy employee there. Um, so moving on from Maverick, you ended up air medical. You were life flight of Maine. You're now MedTrans. You're in the
Yep.
109, right?
Yep. I flew 109s with Life Flight of Maine, who was actually 7 Bar Aviation was the operator. Life Flight of Maine was the program that I flew for up in Maine. I got kind of lucky with that. I applied to that job and I didn't think that I would get it because I had I had quite a few hours at the time, but I had no experience EMS and I had no instrument or twin time. And I got hired. My first check ride, I was signed off in the twin and signed off to fly IFR. So I was kind of real careful with myself with that. New aircraft, new area, IFR. I was very conservative with what I would take for a flight.
Sure.
My first IFR flight, I think the ceilings were like 1,200 feet or 1,000 feet, and climbing up into it just felt like I was doing something wrong because our whole career we're taught to never go near the clouds. And I feel like I'm breaking the rules by climbing into these clouds on purpose. Yeah, and it was, I was very careful. Like I would take, high ceilings like that, get used to the IFR procedures and just flying the thing in the clouds and knowing what the aircraft was going to do before I really started taking the thing to minimums.
I know that the weather can change pretty quickly up in the Northeast as well. Have you had any experiences where you made a pretty conservative call, you took a flight, ceilings were, 1,000, 1,500 feet or whatever, and then they've degraded through your flight and you had to kind of
Yeah,
take an
even
approach
more.
down to, closer to minimums?
Yeah, I had a flight. The reporting too can be it's all monitored by the FAA, but the reporting, way up in northern remote Maine can be not necessarily the most accurate at times. And I had a flight. I just finished a flight. I was on the roof at Eastern Maine Medical Center in Bangor, Maine, and I got another request as I'm fueling up the helicopter, ready to head back south, and it was all the way up to Fort Kent, which is the northernmost part of Maine. About an hour and 20-minute flight north from Bangor, right on the border of Canada. And for people to know, it's hard sometimes looking at a map because it distorts it, but from Fort Kent, Maine to Portland, Maine is about the same distance as from Portland, Maine or the Boston area to Philadelphia. It's huge. It's like 250 miles.
Wow.
And so I checked the weather for that flight and everything looks fine. It's 6,000-foot ceilings up there. It's midsummer, warm temperatures. It's a cloudy day. There's some rain showers rolling through. It's really wilderness up there, and you can see it on the radar rolling through, but nothing heavy. And so I accept the flight and I head up there. And about halfway up, maybe a little bit less, flying at about 1,500, 2,000 feet, I'm losing reception to ATC. I'd always get flight following everywhere I went because you just always kind of have an out, if you're talking to center or approach. And so I'm starting to lose them. And they said, I'm going to, lose you at that altitude. So there were showers in the area, and definitely visibility went up and down at times. So I figured play on the safe side. While I saw a reception, I'll get an IFR clearance. And so I get a clearance. They climb me up. I think it was 6,000 feet, and it's like right at the base of the clouds. And I start kind of skipping in and out of the clouds, and then I go into them. And I had about 40, 50 minutes of the flight left. I'm in the clouds the whole way. And sometimes when you're in the clouds that long, I mean, I'm sure airplane pilots do it all the time, but it's a little weird, like being alone in the cockpit and just being in the clouds for that long. And sometimes you start to feel like, the weather's going to close in below you. And so I keep listening to the weather up in Fort Kent, and it still says the same thing, 6,000 feet. I get up there and I descend, for my final approach fix, and I'm still in the clouds, and I'm well below 6,000 feet at this point. I catch glide slope, and I'm riding an LPV approaching, which for those that don't know is like an ILS. It rides a glide slope all the way down to the runway, and my minimum's 200 feet above the touchdown zone elevation. And I'm riding it down, and I'm watching the hundreds of feet tick off, and I'm still in the clouds. I'm like 500 feet AGL, and I'm still in the clouds. And my mind really starts going because I didn't need an alternate. I've filed this thing in the air, and even if I hadn't, I wouldn't have needed an alternate with 6,000 foot ceiling.
Sure.
And at this point, I'm wondering what I'm going to do when I get to the bottom and I'm still in the clouds. So there were kind of two options, which was you keep going, or you shoot the approach again and go below the minimums until you see the runway, or I try to go to another airport, pick an alternate, but it's so remote up there. The next nearest airport I was going to be very low on fuel. I would be below the minimum required for planning. I had about a 30-minute flight just to get there, and I'd have to shoot an approach at that airport. And when I was shooting this approach, I had about 45 minutes of fuel remaining. And so it was, my mind's really rushing with like, what am I going to do when I get to the bottom of this approach? And thank God I like right between 200 and 300 feet, right at minimums, I broke out, and there was the airport. And it was so sweet to see that runway.
You're like,
And
hallelujah.
yeah, yeah. And then, so after that, your nerves are going a little bit, and we're picking up a patient up there. So I land, and I have about 30 minutes while they get the patient. I get fuel, and then I have to take right back off into it. But a little easier going south, because I just come from Bangor, and the weather was much nicer down there, and I knew it.
That's the crazy part about IFR to me. I've never flown instrument for helicopters, but I think there's such a mental aspect, especially when you're new to it. Not only are you combating just the overall skill and knowledge that it takes to fly in the instrument environment, but you're also kind of combating, like you said, most of all your helicopter career, you stay out of the clouds. And then just the kind of probably increase of anxiety of just being in the clouds, it does,
Yeah.
especially in the beginning, it probably kind of amps you up a little bit. I'm more of a VFR type of guy.
It reminds me of one of the pilots I flew with in the Marine Corps. He was an average pilot and a really, really great guy. He knew it, and he'd say, I'm a really good day VFR pilot. Take me outside of that realm, and I don't do so well.
Yeah, it's like I'm more of a bluebird guy personally.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm actually really good at writing emails. That's really one of my strong suits, actually. Decent pilot, great email writer. Not really. Actually, you've been on the receiving end of some of my poor grammar at times.
Yeah.
I'm
I usually proofread your emails for you.
Yeah, I should have you proof them, and then I should send them. Well, hey, Ian, thanks so much for joining. It seems like you've had a fairly well-rounded career, thus far. And I'm excited for you and what's next. Obviously, I know that you're selling helicopters now. What's that transition been like for you to kind of be on a different side of the aviation business?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I enjoy talking about helicopters, and I know a lot about helicopters because I've been doing it. So it makes it easy to talk in sales. It makes the job really enjoyable, and I think it makes me. It's been nice to learn because I've been really specific in the aircraft that I fly. Right, I've flown a good handful of aircraft, but I only know about those and like the A-Stars. Before sales, I knew the B2 really well. I didn't know a whole lot about a B3 or B3E. And so I get into sales, and I kind of now know all these specifics and knowledge about not only the industry and the market, but also like every model aircraft, when they're made, how much they're worth, all these little nuances about every machine. So it's really cool to kind of get to know it that much more in depth.
Yeah, you got to become an expert in what you're selling, and that
Yeah,
is a cool thing. I tried to sell a lot of things, before I realized that I should probably just sell helicopters because that's all I know about, and
right.
it's easy to sell. It's super easy to sell machines that you're familiar with, and that's why I started selling Robinson specific in the beginning. It gets a little more nerve wracking, a little more intense when you start getting into the bigger airframes, but it's amazing how much you learn, and you learn a different side of it. Even like the H-130 is a good example. Is obviously I had nearly 1,000 hours in the H-130 407 as well. I know a lot about the aircraft from a pilot perspective, but then you start looking at a maintenance tracking report, start learning about the inspection intervals. I feel like I could really, I can read my way through, a status report on a 130 much more in depth than I could have ever, looking at a status report when I was working at Maverick. So it's,
Yeah, I think it really helps you understand the aircraft. Like when you do fly them,
hmm
you feel like you know this thing in and out much more intimately than you did before when you were just kind of wiggling the sticks. Like now you know the core of this aircraft and how it's maintained. And
100%.
yeah,
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, Ian, thank you so much for joining the Helicopter Podcast. For our listeners, if you've enjoyed the podcast, please like it, share it, subscribe to it. We are available on all major podcast platforms. So wherever you enjoy your podcasts, I would encourage you to continue listening. I am committing myself to doing the podcast. The podcast is fun to do. It is a little bit time consuming, and I haven't been good about pushing it out there. So I'm really excited. We have some great episodes lined up. Ian obviously is a great episode. In a couple of weeks, we'll be chatting with the CEO of the Life Flight Network. So that's really exciting. I got to sit down with Catherine Perwin, a Helinet down in Van Nuys, California recently. So we're going to be pushing a podcast for that. So I'm just really excited to push this content. So if you like it, please continue to listen to it. Also love hearing from you all. We will be at the expo this year, exhibiting as Helicopter. So come say hi to us. If I was a really good business owner, I would tell you what booth number we're at, but I don't remember what booth number we're at. But we'll figure it out. We'll find it. We'll find it. We'll find ourselves there. So we're excited. If you are going to be at HAI, please stop by. Ian, thank you so much. Any parting words for our raving audience?
no, just thanks for having me, and I look forward to seeing you all. You guys, I'll be at Heli Expo, with you in the helicopter team. So look forward to seeing you all there.
Oh, we didn't tell you. You're not coming anymore.
Good.
Gonna,
Just freed up that week.
I'm gonna need your helicopter shirts back, pal. This is awkward to do it on this. Sorry to have to.
Yeah.
No, we're excited. Well, Ian, thanks so much. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to the Helicopter Podcast.
As always, a special thanks to Helicopter for producing this podcast. Specializing in helicopter evaluations, faster sales, and superb service, Helicopter is the go-to agency for clients expecting immediate results. Helicopter's team of helicopter professionals are the best in the business. Using their aviation expertise, a nationwide network, and a proprietary 76-step listing strategy, Helicopter will convert your listing from Mayday to payday. Ready to get started? Text Helicopter to 1-855-Helicopter. That's Helicopter to 1-855-735-5226. And a Helicopter pilot agent will reach out. Helicopter. List it, sell it, done.